Ladies and gentlemen, at the outset I thank the Federation of Chambers of Commerce and the Institute of Company Secretaries of India for giving me this opportunity of being here to speak on the subject of mergers and acquisitions as dealt with under the 2013 Act. Before I get on to the subject, I want to make two observations. First, I must express my deep admiration for the way Mr. Butt has taken the trouble of getting the regulator's point of view across to the professionals and to the industry. As Vasanthi said rightly this morning, the entire exercise is conjoint between the regulator and the regulated, and there is no scope for conflict. And I see that the move of Mr. Butt to explain in detail the procedure for incorporation of companies is simply to drive home the point that we want to do business with you, and therefore please cooperate. I compliment you, sir, for what you have done. That's wonderful. The second point I want to make is with reference to the difference in approach. I believe of the lawmaker between the subject that was dealt with in the first session, namely the representation of women on the board of directors of the company, and with respect to mergers and acquisitions. In the first, whether we like it or not, there is an element of emotion. The progress of society is always measured in terms of how we treat our women. That is possibly what impelled the lawmakers to provide for compulsory representation of women on the board of directors. Large part of it may be supported by logic, but some part of it is not supported by logic. The raison d'etre for inclusion of women on the board of directors of a company is not wholly from the mind. Some part of it is from the heart. But when we come to a subject like mergers and acquisitions, the entire law is purely geared to ensure that the activity of mergers and acquisitions is not taking place with a view to cause injury to public interest or that the interest of the company is forsaken. At the outset, it is important for you to know that the provisions of the Companies Act 2013 with reference to mergers and acquisitions have not been given effect to. So, today, we are still governed by the provisions contained in the 1956 Act, provisions of sections 391 and 394. With respect to acquisition of a company, either by way of a slump sale or by acquisition of shares of the company, there is not too much of regulation under the Act, excepting that you need to follow the provisions of the Articles of Association of the company. Therefore, these provisions relating to mergers and acquisitions really have no role to play when we really talk about acquisition of a company. So let's therefore focus on what we term as mergers and amalgamations. That is, one company merging with another, the transferor company merging with the transferee company, and thereby losing its identity as a corporate. In other words, what the law envisages as a process of dissolution without winding up. Broadly, the provisions of the 1956 Act and the 2013 Act are similar, but there is one major deviation. I will come to it separately. Let's look at the provisions of the two statutes with respect to a normal merger process. Under the 1956 Act, it was necessary for the transferor company and the transferee company to make an application to the court, though it says tribunal, but since the NCLT has not yet been formed, it continues to remain with the High Court, within whose jurisdiction the registered office of the transferor company and the transferee company are located. There are two separate proceedings that need to be initiated for the purpose of starting the process of merger or amalgamation. The first process, or the initial process, is for the transferor company and the transferee company, assuming that the transferor company and the transferee company are in two different locations and are in two different states and therefore coming within the jurisdiction of two different high courts. It is necessary that application should be made to the respective high courts for a direction to convene meetings. Meetings are ordered to be convened of different classes of shareholders and different classes of creditors separately, and the High Court does give directions as to how the meeting has to be conducted. Once the meeting has been conducted, the chairman files a report, and within a prescribed time, the second process in the matter of mergers or amalgamation starts, namely when you file a petition seeking the court's sanction for the approval granted at the meeting of the shareholders and the creditors. It is at that point of time that the court steps in to say, let me see if the scheme and the approval granted by the shareholders or the creditors is injurious to public interest. Is it injurious to the interest of the company? If the answer to these two questions are the negative, the court does grant its sanction. This was the process that existed in the 1956 Act. Anybody and everybody who is connected with the company, be it a shareholder with 1 share, be it a creditor with 1 rupee outstanding, could come and state his or her objections before the court, before the scheme is sanctioned, even though the overwhelming majority of shareholders and creditors have approved the scheme at the meetings. It was possible for the court to say, no, at the instance of this 1 shareholder, at the instance of this 1 creditor, I will not sanction the scheme. Now, this created some difficulties where even where the majority of the shareholders had approved the scheme, even though the majority of the creditors in value had approved the scheme, there were people who created trouble and put spoke in the wheel for many oblique motives. It is therefore that under the 2013 Act, a provision has been made for an opportunity for shareholders to object, provided they hold a specified number of shares in the company. In other words, those who hold shares below that particular percentage are not entitled to have a say in the matter of mergers and acquisitions. Shareholder holding less than a specified percentage of the outstanding debts of the company have no role or have no say in the matter of mergers and acquisitions. This is a significant change that has been made under the 2013 Act with respect to mergers and acquisitions. One important aspect which has been specifically provided for under the 2013 Act, which does not exist under the 1956 Act, is that every shareholder has to be provided a copy of the valuation report. Now, this provision was not there. This is important because, as you are aware, in a merger or acquisition, there is always a swap ratio. The shareholders of the transferor company get shares in the transferee company. And how many shares in the transferee company should the shareholders of the transferor company get is dependent upon the value of the transferor company and the value of the transferee company, and that determines the swap ratio. Under the 1956 Act, this was always a contentious issue. A classic case which entered the Supreme Court, where this question arose for consideration, was in the case of Mihir Mafatlal, where the challenge was to the valuation or the swap ratio that had been put in the scheme, which provided for X number of shares for Y number of shares. X number of shares in the transferee company will get Y number of shares in the transferee company, and that was questioned. And then the grievance that was made before the court was that we have no idea as to the basis on which this swap ratio has been determined. After all, it is my property. I am told that I am going to get X number of shares for Y number of shares. Why is it that I am not told the basis on which this ratio has been determined? This became a contentious issue, and of course in that case the company proved to the court that the swap ratio had been determined in a scientific manner on the basis of valuation that had been obtained from an independent accountant. That was done in the court proceedings, and the court was satisfied that the swap ratio was right. But at no point of time earlier did the shareholder whose property was being dealt with know the basis on which the swap ratio had been done. It is therefore with a view to provide transparency in all these matters that the new Act now requires that the notice must be accompanied by a copy of the valuation report, so that at the meeting of the shareholders or at the meeting of the creditors, the shareholders or the creditors can exercise their oath in an intelligent and informed manner. This is one significant departure. This is the second significant departure, I would say, in the scheme under the 1956 Act and the 2013 Act. Having said that, there is a very important departure that has been made under the 2013 Act, which provides for mergers of what are called as small companies or merger of a subsidiary with a holding company. In respect of small company, which is a defined term, with respect to merger of a subsidiary with a holding company, the procedure prescribed has been done away with. This procedure prescribed with respect to normal acquisitions, normal mergers or amalgamations has been done away with. There is no need to go and seek the intervention of the court. The resolutions are passed, they are filed with the central government. The registrar of companies or the official liquidator can submit his objection to the central government. The central government can then bring it before the tribunal, and the tribunal will decide as to whether the acquisition was right or wrong. In fact, I have an observation to make. This, in my view, should have been the procedure even with respect to normal mergers and acquisitions. I will state my point before this august audience, and if you think that my point of view is worth consideration, I appeal to you to place it as a suggestion of this august body with the central government, because what I am now suggesting requires an amendment to the provisions of the 2013 Act. It cannot be done by a notification or by rules issued under the Act. Whether to merge or amalgamate a company is a pure economic decision. There is nothing else in it excepting to ask the question, what is in it for me if I merge? Is it going to be more profitable? will we have the scales of operation which will enable more efficient performance of the two companies? These are the vital factors which go into a decision as to whether there should be a merger or an amalgamation. Who are the best persons to decide as to whether in fact there should be a merger or amalgamation? Obviously, it is the stakeholders, namely, primarily the shareholders and the creditors. Of course, there is the third class of stakeholder, namely the public. The custodian of public interest in a situation of this kind is the registrar of companies or the official liquidator. If the two primary stakeholders have decided that it is in their interest that there should be this merger or acquisition, merger or amalgamation, I ask myself, where does the court or the tribunal come in this decision making process? If really there is an injury to public interest by virtue of this merger or amalgamation, then like in the case of merger of small companies or merger of a subsidiary with a holding company, a provision can be made for the central government to then seek to upset the merger or amalgamation, instead of making the court sanction a prerequisite for a merger or amalgamation. Because look at what the Supreme Court said in Meher Mafatlal. That's the classic leading case on the point. And that principle is not sought to be undone under the provisions of the 2013 Act, and on the contrary, the whole object of the 2013 Act is to ensure that the corporates are given greater freedom in the matter of managing their business because they know what's good for them. Now, what did Meher Mafatlal say? Meher Mafatlal said, it is no scope of the court's investigative role in a scheme petition to find out as to whether the scheme is a prudent one, a commercially good one, whether it is something which is backed by commercial wisdom. Commercial wisdom, prudence are all left to the shareholders or to the creditors whose meetings are convened. Then what does the court have to do in a situation where the court is not sitting as an appeal over the wisdom of the shareholders or the creditors? The court is simply trying to find out, and the court put it very nicely. The court said this is like a game of cricket, and the court is like an umpire. The umpire does not play the game. The umpire only makes sure that the players play the game according to the rules of the game. If this is the limited role of the court as an umpire, then where I ask myself is the need for the court to step in as a prerequisite for sanction of the scheme. Why can't it be post? If really there is an injury to public interest. Because there are more than 80% of the schemes don't involve any element of public interest. But let me tell you out of practical experience. A scheme normally takes anywhere between 6 to 9 months for getting sanctioned in court. And that's a long period of time from a business point of view. And ultimately, we have seen in courts, we file thousands of pages. You file the articles of association, you file the resolutions, you file the accounts, you file the scheme, you file the approvals from the shareholders and creditors, all this running into 1,000 pages. And at the end of it, what does the court look at? the court will say, is there a provision in your articles or memorandum providing for merger? Yes. Is it sanctioned? Yes. Any particular objection? No. Sanctioned. Now for this, it takes anywhere between 6 to 9 months. And I see no reason why we should continue this archaic procedure for the purpose of mergers and amalgamations. So I would request that you should recommend to the central government that this process must be reversed. The court coming into the scene, court or the tribunal, whatever it is. When the tribunal comes, we'll refer it as tribunal. Today it's the court. When the court or the tribunal coming into the scene should be post the scheme being sanctioned. If nobody approaches the court, that is the end of the matter. So this is one provision that you may kindly look at. Of course, the provision relating to mergers of small companies and merger of a subsidiary of the holding company is a step in the right direction, where you don't need the court's intervention at the initial stage. Now, there is another important departure that has been made under the 2013 Act. Under the 1956 Act, a foreign company could merge with an Indian company with certain riders attached to it. But there was no provision for merger of an Indian company with a foreign company. That has been provided for under the new statute. That is a interesting provision which I think is will advance globalization of the economy and provide a level playing field. Now, there is another aspect which I want to raise before you. It has nothing to do with the procedural aspects of it, because I must frankly tell you that I look at a law as a lawyer, not from the procedural aspects. To me, procedure is not that important from the legal standpoint. From the legal standpoint, I look at the law from the point of interpretation. I look at the law in order to see if the law advances the cause for which it is enacted. Not only from the point of view of that particular statute, but from a holistic manner in the context of the law in several areas. Now let us look at one important aspect of the Companies Act in relation to mergers and amalgamations. In the context of another very important law which went through a drastic change. And in fact, like the 1956 Act, which is now sought to be replaced by the 2013 Act, the Indian Parliament, in keeping with its obligation as a member of the United Nations, as a member of the UNCITRAL, replaced the Arbitration Act of 1940 with a new law, the Arbitration and Conciliation Act of 1996. Now the object of the entire exercise was to promote arbitration as an alternate dispute resolution mechanism. And why did we want to do that? We wanted to do that because there was so much of burden on the court system, and administration of justice was becoming more and more difficult. One provision of the Companies Act 1956 in relation to mergers and acquisitions was Section 392 of the Companies Act. Section 392 of the Companies Act gave a very broad and sweeping power to the court, which sanctioned the scheme to do everything that is required to remove any difficulties in the matter of implementation of the scheme. Now the question that arose was as to whether, when there is a dispute arising out of a scheme, say between the shareholders of the transferor company and the transferee company in the matter of allotment of shares to a particular shareholder in accordance with the scheme. Or there is a problem between the transferor company and the transferee company. Where did you have to go to get the dispute resolved? Necessarily to the court, because 392 provided for a remedy. The question was, can you have an arbitration clause in a scheme for merger or amalgamation? Scheme for merger or amalgamation, as sanctioned by the court, operates in rem. In other words, it operates as against the entire world. If it operates against the entire world, can that dispute in relation to a contract which is sanctioned by the court, which order is an order in rem, can it be decided by a private arbitrator? The answer was no. The same provisions have been put in the 2013 Act. The tribunal which sanctions the scheme is given the power to remove all difficulties in the matter of implementation. In other words, excluding arbitration as a means for resolving disputes, which I think is not in the interest of the industry, is not in the interest of dispensation of justice in this country. Because we know that problems or disputes arising out of schemes are complex. Normally, they are time consuming, they are high stake, they need to be resolved in a time bound manner. Are courts or tribunals equipped to do that? When I say equipped, I am not for a moment saying are they competent. I am saying, do we have sufficient infrastructure in this country at this point of time to have these disputes resolved through a regular court process? Or should we provide for these disputes to be resolved through a process outside of the court? I think the latter is a solution. That has not been provided for in the 2013 Act. In fact, the 2013 Act in relation to resolution of disputes is a little oblivious of a sister enactment, namely the Arbitration and Conciliation Act of 1996. We have to look at every law in a holistic manner, make recommendations to the government appropriately. Thank you very much for your patient hearing. I appreciate it.